Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA Reddit stories. In this Ripe Stories video, imagine buying your dream property only to find out your HOA neighbors have been using your private road like their personal shortcut for years. Then the second you lock it up, one furious board member calls the police and acts like you are the criminal. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled HOA-Karen Calls 911 because I locked off my property and set a trap on my private property. I bought my property about 3 years ago. It is a rural lot in a semi-rural area outside of a city. The land has been in various private hands for decades, and the previous owner was an older guy who used it mostly for hunting and had a small cabin on it that he would stay in on weekends. When he passed, his kids sold it, and I scooped it up for a decent price. I tore down the old cabin and built a proper house on it. My wife and I moved in about 2.5 years ago, and now here's the layout, and this is important for understanding the whole situation at play. My property is roughly rectangular and sits on the eastern edge of a newer housing development. This development is an HOA community, maybe 120 homes total, built about 10 years ago. The main entrance to this HOA neighborhood is off a country road on the west side, and there's only one official entrance and exit to the neighborhood. To get to the nearest highway from the HOA neighborhood using the official roads, you have to go out the main entrance, take the country road south for about 2 miles, and then get on the highway from there. It adds maybe 5 or 6 minutes to your commute, depending on traffic. Here's where my property comes in though. Running along the southern edge of my land is a gravel path. It is about 15 feet wide and runs from my property line near the HOA neighborhood all the way out to a rural road on the eastern side of my land. That rural road connects directly to the highway, so if someone were to drive through my property using this gravel path, they could cut about 5 to 6 minutes off their drive to the highway. It is a shortcut. The previous owner apparently didn't care that people used it, or maybe he didn't even know since he was only out there on weekends. Either way, the HOA residents had been driving through this path for years like it was a public road. There were no gates, no signs, nothing to indicate it was private property, other than the fact that it was, obviously a gravel path running through someone's land and not an actual paved road. When I first moved in, I noticed tire tracks on the path but didn't think too much of it. But then one morning about 3 weeks after we moved in, I was having coffee on my back porch and watched 4 cars in a row drive down the gravel path heading towards the rural road. Just casually driving through my property like it was a normal part of their morning commute, I walked down there the next morning and waited. And sure enough, starting at about 7:15 a.m., cars started coming through. I flagged down the first one, guy in a pickup truck. I waved him down and he rolled his window down looking annoyed. Me, hey, just so you know, this is private property, this is not a public road. Him, I've been using this road for 6 years. Me, I understand that, but I just bought this property and I would appreciate it if people stopped driving through it. Him, are you serious right now? You're going to block the shortcut? Me, it is not a shortcut, it is my land. He just shook his head and then drove off. I had similar conversations with a few other people that week. Nobody was outright hostile or something, but nobody seemed to think that I had a legitimate complaint either. The general attitude was that they'd been doing it forever and I was being unreasonable for asking them to stop. I reached out to the HOA and I found the management company's number on one of those community signs at the entrance to the neighborhood. I called and explained the situation. The woman I spoke to was polite, but basically told me that since my property was not part of the HOA, they had no authority over what their residents did outside the neighborhood boundaries. She suggested I put up signs. So I did, and I bought 4 no trespassing signs from the hardware store and put them up along the gravel path, 2 at each end, and I also put up a chain across the entrance closest to the HOA neighborhood. Just a simple chain between 2 posts with a no trespassing sign hanging from it. That lasted about a day. Someone unhooked the chain and left it on the ground. I put it back up. Someone unhooked it again. This happened like 4 times in 1 week. But then on the 5th time, someone didn't just unhook it, they cut it. I found the chain on the ground with a clean cut through one of the links. At this point, I was genuinely getting angry and I went and bought a heavy-duty gate. Not a fancy automatic one, just a solid steel tube gate that I bolted to 2 concrete set posts on the HOA side of the path. I padlocked it and I also bought a second gate and did the same thing on the rural road side of the path. Now both ends were blocked, things were quiet for about 4 days, and then I came home from work on a Thursday to find a note tucked into my front door. It said, and I'm paraphrasing from memory here, "You are blocking a road that had been used by this community for over a decade. We demand that you remove the gates immediately or we will take legal action. This affects over 100 families." It was signed by someone identifying themselves as a member of the HOA board, no specific name, just HOA board member. I threw it away and went on with my life. The following Saturday morning around 10 AM, I heard honking coming from the direction of the gate nearest to the HOA neighborhood. I walked down there and found a woman sitting in her SUV, laying on the horn. When she saw me coming, she got out of her car. Her, "Are you the property owner?" Me, "Yeah, I am." Her, "You need to open this gate right now. This is a community access road and you have no right to block it." Me, "This is my property, it's not a community anything, it's private land." Her, "I'm on the HOA board and I'm telling you that this road has been in use for over 10 years. You cannot just come in here and shut it down." Me, "I absolutely can because it's mine. I have the deed, I have the survey, and I have the property tax records. This is not a public road, it never was. You and your neighbors have been trespassing on private property." Her, "This is ridiculous, I'm calling the police." Me, "Go ahead." She got back in her SUV and made a call. About 20 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy showed up. He was a younger guy, pretty calm about the whole thing, and he talked to the woman first and then came over to me. I'd already gone back to the house and grabbed my property survey, which I'd gotten when I bought the place, and the deed. The deputy looked everything over and said, "Yeah, this is pretty clear. This is your land." I said, "I know. I've been trying to tell them that for weeks." He walked back over to the woman and I could hear most of the conversation from where I was standing. "Deputy, ma'am, this is private property. The survey and deed are clear. He's within his rights to put up a gate." Her, "But we've been using this road for years. That has to count for something." Deputy, "It doesn't work like that. If it's private property, it's private property. Using it without permission does not make it yours." Her, "This is not over. The HOA will be looking into this." Deputy, "That's between you and your HOA, but I would advise against doing anything to this man's gate or property. That would be criminal trespassing and destruction of property." She left. The deputy came back to me, gave me back my documents and told me to call if anyone tampered with the gates again, and he also suggested I get cameras, which I was already planning on doing. Over the next week I installed 6 security cameras around my property. 2 pointed at each gate, 1 covering my driveway and 1 covering the back of my house. I set them up to record 24/7 with motion alerts sent to my phone, and I also ran them through a cloud backup service, so even if someone destroyed the cameras, the footage was already saved somewhere. Now here's where the spike strips come in, and I know some people are gonna have opinions about this, so let me explain my reasoning. After the cameras went up, I caught people on video messing with my gates like 3 more times in 2 weeks. Twice someone tried to pry the padlock off with what looked like a crowbar. The 3rd time someone actually brought bolt cutters and cut the lock clean off. I found the gate swinging open when I got home from work and checked the camera footage. The person who cut the lock was wearing a hat and I couldn't get a clear face, but it was clearly someone from the neighborhood based on the direction they came from. I replaced the lock with an even heavier one and added a secondary chain. I also filed a police report for the lock cutting. The deputy came back out, took a copy of the camera footage and filed the report. He told me straight up that unless they could identify the person, there wasn't much they could do. He did say the report would be useful if things escalated further. At this point I was fed up. I talked to my wife about it and she was just as frustrated as I was. We talked about what else we could do and I did some research and talked to a lawyer. The lawyer told me that as a property owner, I had the right to use reasonable measures to protect my property from trespassers, especially since I had documented repeated trespassing and property damage. He specifically mentioned that tire deflation devices on private property were legal in my state as long as there was adequate signage warning people. He compared it to barbed wire fencing on ranch land. You can put it up as long as you warn people it is there, so I bought 2 sets of commercial spike strips. These are not the police chase kind that shred your tires. These are the kind they use at parking garage exits, basically a row of angled metal teeth that will puncture a tire if you drive over them in the wrong direction. If you drive over them the right way, meaning from inside the property heading out, the teeth fold flat and you are fine, but if you drive in from outside, the teeth catch your tires. I installed 1 set just inside each gate on my property site, about 10 feet past the gate itself. Then I put up big bright yellow signs on both gates that read, "Warning, private property, tire deflation devices in use, enter at your own risk, trespassers will be prosecuted." I put 2 signs on each gate so there was no way you could miss them. For about 2 weeks nothing happened. The gates stayed locked, nobody tampered with them, and no cars came through. I thought maybe people had finally gotten the message, but then I went on a weekend trip with my wife. We left Friday afternoon and were coming back Sunday evening. On Saturday morning around 9 AM, I got a motion alert on my phone from the camera at the HOA side gate. I opened the app and watched the live feed. There were two people at the gate. One was the same woman from the honking incident, the HOA board member. The other was a man I didn't recognize. They were standing at the gate looking at the signs, and then the man pulled out bolt cutters and cut my chain. They swung the gate open and walked onto my property on foot. They walked down the gravel path towards my house looking around, and they walked right past the spike strips since they were on foot, and the strips are really only a problem for vehicles. They spent about 15 minutes walking around my property. They got close to my house, looked in the windows, they walked around my garage, and the man was taking photos of everything with his phone. At one point, the woman pointed at my house and they talked for a while, then they walked back to the gate and left. I was livid. My wife asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I wanted to call the sheriff right then and there. She convinced me to wait until we got home so we could sit down with the full camera footage and file a proper report, and she was right. I saved all the footage to my computer, made multiple backup copies, and I watched all of it carefully. The two of them were clearly doing some kind of walk through my property. The man was photographing everything, and at one point on the audio from one of the cameras near the gate, I could hear the woman say something like, "This whole section could be reclassified," and "We need to bring this to the board." Monday morning, I went to the sheriff's office and filed the report. I brought a USB drive with all the footage. The deputy who had been dealing with my case before was not in, but the officer I spoke to took the report seriously. Criminal trespassing, destruction of property for the chain, and I mentioned the previous incidents. He told me he would follow up. That Wednesday, I got a letter in my mailbox from the HOA management company. It was a formal notice saying that the HOA was exploring legal options to establish an easement on my property based on historical use, and that I should expect to be contacted by their legal counsel. It also said that pending the legal review, they were requesting that I remove the gates and spike strips to restore community access. I brought this letter to my lawyer. He told me that prescriptive easement claims are extremely hard to prove, and in my state the trespassing would have had to be open, notorious and continuous for at least 20 years, which it hadn't been since the HOA neighborhood was only about 10 years old. He also said that even if they could prove the path had been used for 10 years, I had evidence that the previous owner gave no explicit or implied permission, and that I had taken clear steps to revoke any implicit permission the moment I became aware of the trespassing. He said their case was basically dead on arrival, and he also told me that the trespassing with a board member and the unknown man was a serious matter and that I should pursue it. I told him I already filed a police report about it. He said good, and to let him know if the HOA actually followed through with legal action so he could respond. About a week after the letter, I got served with actual legal papers. In short, the HOA was suing me. They were claiming prescriptive easement and also arguing that my spike strips constituted a booby trap that endangered public safety. They wanted a judge to order me to remove the gates, remove the spike strips, and grant a permanent easement across my property. My lawyer filed a response and we started preparing our case. This was where things got really interesting. We did some digging and found out that when the HOA neighborhood was originally developed, the developer actually approached the previous owner of my property about purchasing a strip of land for a second access road, and the previous owner refused. This was documented in county records. So the developer, the HOA, and everyone involved in building that neighborhood knew from day one that the gravel path was on private property and was not a public road. They knew this and they still let their residents use it. My lawyer also managed to get some other HOA-related documents, and in these documents there were references to the Eastern Access Path and discussions about maintaining access to the private road. On our side, we had all the camera footage, the police reports, the cut chains, the cut log, the documented trespassing by the board member, photos of my signs, and the property survey. My lawyer also got a statement from the sheriff's office confirming the reports I'd filed. Now here's the part where the spike strips come back into the story. About 3 weeks before our court date, I went out of town again for work. I was gone for 2 days. When I got home, I pulled up the camera footage to check on things, and there it was. On the second day I was gone at around 2 PM, a car pulled up to the HOA side gate. It was the same woman again, the board member. This time she was alone. She got out and she had a key. No bolt cutters, an actual key. I don't know where she got it, but somehow she had gotten a key that worked on my padlock. She unlocked the gate, swung it open, got back in her car, and drove through the gate onto my property. She drove down the gravel path towards my house, and about 10 feet in, she hit the spike strips. The camera caught the whole thing. You could see the front of her SUV dip as the front tires hit the strips. She must have heard or felt it because the car lurched and then she hit the gas instead of the brake. I think out of panic. The car swerved to the right, went off the gravel path, and went into the soft ground beside it. The right front tire was already deflating and the car tilted and slid sideways into a shallow drainage ditch that runs along the side of the path. The car didn't roll or anything that dramatic, but it was stuck at an angle in the ditch, with the front end pointing down and the driver's side up. She got out of the car and she was clearly shaken up. She stood there for a minute and then got on her phone. About 30 minutes later, a tow truck showed up along with another car that had 2 people in it. They all stood around looking at the spike strips and the signs. The tow truck pulled her SUV out of the ditch. Both front tires were flat. The tow truck took the car away, and the woman and the other 2 people left in the second car. Nobody closed my gate behind them. When I watched this footage, I immediately called my lawyer. He told me to save everything, make copies, and that this was basically a gift from heaven for our case. He said, they are suing you, claiming you are endangering public safety with your spike strips, and one of their own board members just trespassed on your property, used what appears to be a copied key on your lock, and drove past multiple warning signs and ran right into the strips. This is going to go very well for us. So I also filed another police report. This time the deputy actually went to the woman's house and issued her a formal citation for criminal trespassing. She was also cited for destruction of property because she had apparently damaged my gate latch when she swung it open too hard, and it bent the mounting bracket. Our court date came a bit later. The HOA's lawyer presented their case for the prescriptive easement. He argued the path had been used continuously for over a decade and that it had become a de facto community road. He also argued that my spike strips were dangerous and disproportionate. My lawyer went next and systematically took their whole case apart. He presented the county records showing the original developer was denied permission to buy the land for a road, and he presented the HOA's own meeting minutes showing they knew the path was private property. He presented my property survey and deed. He also presented the timeline of events showing that I made every reasonable effort to notify residents and stop the trespassing before escalating to gates and spike strips. Then he got to the camera footage and he showed the judge the video of the board member and the unknown man cutting my chain and walking around my property while I was away. He showed the footage of them looking in my windows and photographing my house. Then he played the footage of the board member coming back alone with a key, driving through the gate, hitting the spike strips and ending up in a ditch. My lawyer pointed out the warning signs visible in the footage. Your Honor, there are 2 large clearly visible signs on this gate warning about tire deflation devices. The plaintiff's own board member drove past these signs after unlocking the gate with what we believe is a duplicated key. She was not some innocent passerby. She had been to this property multiple times without permission, and she had been cited by the sheriff for trespassing, and she still came back. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue that the spike strips could harm emergency vehicles or someone who made a legitimate mistake. My lawyer countered that the property was gated, locked and signed, and that no emergency vehicle would need to access my property through a padlocked gate. He also pointed out that I had a regular driveway off a different road for actual access to my house. The judge took a recess for about an hour and then came back with his ruling. He denied the prescriptive easement claim entirely. He cited the county records proving the HOA knew the land was private, the fact that the neighborhood was only 10 years old, which didn't meet the statutory minimum for prescriptive easement in our state, and the fact that I had taken immediate steps to block access when I became the owner. On the spike strips, he ruled that they were a legal property protection measure given the documented pattern of repeated trespassing, property damage, and the clear signage warning anyone who approached the gates. He compared it to electric fencing on agricultural property, which is legal with proper signage, and then he addressed the HOA directly and told them that their board member's behavior was troubling and that she had committed multiple documented criminal acts on my property. He said the HOA should consider itself fortunate that I hadn't filed the countersuit yet, which of course I had already told my lawyer I wanted to do, so we filed the countersuit against the HOA and against a board member individually. We sued for property damage, the cut chains, cut locks, bent gate hardware, trespassing and harassment. And we also included the cost of the security cameras, the gates, the spike strips and my legal fees. The total came to about $14,000. We ended up settling at close to $15,000 plus a written agreement that the HOA would formally notify our residents that the gravel path was private property and that any resident caught trespassing would face fines from the HOA in addition to whatever criminal charges I chose to pursue. The board member ended up having to pay the portion related to her individual trespassing and property damage out of her own pocket, which was about $3,800 of the total. The rest came from the HOA's budget, which means every homeowner in that neighborhood effectively helped pay for her stupidity through their HOA dues. After the settlement, I got a copy of the notice the HOA sent to all residents, and it was very clear and very direct. It stated that the gravel path on the eastern boundary was private property and that the owner had legal security measures in place, and that anyone caught using the path without permission would face HOA fines and potential criminal prosecution, and that the HOA wouldn't defend or represent any resident who chose to trespass. The board member resigned from the board about a month after the settlement. I heard from my neighbor, who's one of the few HOA residents I actually get along with, that she tried to rally support against me at a board meeting after the settlement and basically got shut down. Nobody wanted to go through another round of this, and he told me that most people in the neighborhood were just annoyed at her for costing them money and causing drama. And the next one is a story from r/maliciouscompliance, which is titled, I host a Leave as a Team countdown daily. So I work in a large building and we have to digitally clock in and out. I would leave my desk 3 to 5 minutes early to get to the exit and clock out on leaving time. My boss complained though, which I actually thought was fair enough, and then he justified it by saying, we are a team and family, we should leave together. So now I leave my desk and head to the front desk and count down the seconds with colleagues until we can all clock out together. Fallout so far has been loud sighs. And yeah guys, thanks for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.